right. Happy Sunday night, guys. I am your host, Wes Seiler from the Berkin Conservative, and I am thrilled to be hosting another episode of Refounding Fathers. I've got Kyle, my libertarian friend. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, thanks. What? Great, man. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. And then Chris, my liberal Democratic buddy that I always love debating with. It's good to have you back as well. So I feel like I just saw you guys just a few days ago. It feels like it was yesterday. I know it was back Wednesday, but man, I just wanted to tell you we have gotten so many positive reactions from that show. I'm so grateful to both of you guys for jumping in. Had my brother John on there, and in the midst of all that craziness that was happening in DC, we got to do a show the same night, do some hot takes. And I've had people texting me, calling me, coming up to me at church and everywhere else, saying, "Hey, thank you for doing that." Kind of laying down some of the facts, and we feel like you were a voice of reason and sanity, trying to make your way through this. So thank you guys to both of you for being on that show and what we talked about. So I do want to kind of pick up with that. Where are you now? It's been a few days. We've seen more reports come out. We've seen a lot of people's reactions to what occurred. More and more facts have come out, more and more details about who is involved. There's been people apologizing, for being a part of it. There's been accusations it was anti-fascist here, or this person actually was a Trump supporter, and people disowning some of the movement. Some people saying this is exactly what needed to happen. So there's been reactions all over the map. So I want to kind of start off with Chris here and just kind of get your take. Where have you been the past few days, mentally and emotionally, on this?
Well, I was very angry Wednesday. I was very angered by what I was seeing. I can't necessarily say my anger has subsided very much, but I do have a little bit more hope that maybe some of the people who were responsible for this attack are being held accountable, if not necessarily by the government, then by the private sector. So some of the things over the last few days, I do hope that there are consequences for this attempted insurrection.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing in the conservative circles, because I follow a bunch of conservative pages, and there's a lot of reflection going on, a lot of thought processes, a lot of people working through it, in terms of what they saw. And I think a lot of soul searching going on within the conservative movement of where do we go from here? This really starts to change things when we think about the future of our country. How do we approach elections in the future? And honestly, how did this get out of hand? But at the same time, we talked about it on Wednesday. This is not the first time there's been violence. And obviously, the first time in a long time there's been this level, especially directed at the Capitol. But there's been violence throughout the year, and it's been building. I saw something. It was like an Anchorman meme, and it was Will Ferrell, and it was like, boy, that didn't escalate quickly. It escalated over 4 years, and a lot of people saw it coming. And that's kind of how I felt, is when you get to this point where, a large group of people have not just lost faith in the elections, they've lost faith in the entire institution of government. That includes the courts and includes everything. And, they're at this point where they're desperate for justice. And then they're right here next to what has been labeled the deep state. You're going to, and then all of a sudden there is this feeling that there's no other recourse but violence. Of course, you're going to have something like this. But at the same time, does that speak for everybody? Does everybody who's a Trump supporter, agree with this? Of course not. Of course not. And so kind of sorting through that, where are you? Where do we go from here? I think is a big question in conservative circles. So Kyle, coming from more of the libertarian perspective, I know we got a lot of your takes on it, and I appreciated that. But same question for you, brother. Where are you now? Going from Wednesday to Sunday, has anything changed in your mind?
I wouldn't say anything changed. I think that I definitely I had the strongest opinion probably of anyone, that I was probably the least offended in our group by it. I think there's a group of people who work in that building who have a 14% approval rating, who don't work for the people, who don't work in the interest of the people, who work to suppress liberty across the board. There have been 100 reasons for us to storm the Capitol before. I wouldn't storm it for Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not going to shed a tear if politicians get a little scared on their toes from time to time. Thomas Jefferson even said, famously, and I think it's 1787, that we shouldn't go 20 or more years without a revolution or some sort of rebellion. So,
Well,
go ahead.
One of the thoughts that I had is, I was talking in the monologue on Wednesday about the difference between violence for justice's sake and violence for its own sake. And one of the questions that I always had is, what is the goal of this? What is the goal? Like, there were specific things that were done in the past, especially in American history. Is why did we dump tea into the harbor? It was to make a point that we refuse the tea act, right? Like, there have been specific symbolic measures that have been taken for the sake of violence. And so many people have been coming out of this saying, I was caught up in the emotion. I was caught up in the moment. There was so much rage and anger, and it just got the best of me. And that's kind of what I was talking about is, I don't necessarily have a problem with people, residents, citizens, that type of thing, protesting, making a point. Even if it gets to this point, there may be some type of legitimacy for something, but what are you trying to change?
Right. Exactly.
What were they going to do? Were they going to strangle Mike Pence? Is that really what's that going to do?
Right.
Is that going to prevent Biden from being elected? I constantly go back to the analogy that we had talked about before of sometimes I hate it when the referees make a bad call, in a sports game. But what am I going to do? Am I going to go kill the referee? Is that going to help my team win?
Exactly.
It's not. There are certainly frustrations in this, but when you take violence, it has to be, for a purpose. For it to be just in my book. And I'm still not entirely sure what that was. To have, congressmen having anxiety attacks like, on the Senate floor, is that really the end of it? And I don't think it was planned in that regard. It was just, hey, this is an emotion.
Oh yeah, that was emotion getting out of hand for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where I part with it. That's where I part with it. But the issues still remain. The issues still remain in terms of our government and, so many things that we've talked about on this show. One of the things that did occur in the past few days that we didn't talk about because it frankly hadn't happened yet is social media, big tech companies have all started to take action. I know two of the big events is that Donald Trump had his Twitter permanently closed. So they've blocked him from being able to use Twitter, which, has been a huge source of him getting his messages out. At the same time, Parler, where a lot of people, who are Trump supporters and conservatives have gone to, has, as last I heard, Google, Apple, we're all starting to work towards removing that from their stores, being able to get it. So there's definitely been this huge backlash to silence thought. So I want to cue you up, Kyle, to be able to speak to that because I know you've done some research on it coming from a libertarian perspective. So let us know what you found.
Sure. Yeah. So just kind of set this up. I know we've just talked about it, but just for the sake of kind of putting a little more context into it, so this week there was a pro-Trump march in Washington that turned into a let's call it a mostly peaceful protest inside the Capitol. It was led by some knockoff Duck Dynasty guys and a man in a Chewbacca bikini. Social media and the rest of big tech has really come down hard on President Trump since then. Since the MAGA crowd decided to serve their own no-knock warrant to the Capitol building, the following social media sites and tech companies have banned the president from using their services. So these are the ones who have deplatformed him or permanently disabled his accounts. Reddit, Shopify, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Apple, Discord, Pinterest, and Stripe. So literally the only thing that Donald Trump's iPhone is even good for anymore is to make calls and to play Candy Crush and God willing, to set up his very own OnlyFans account because I think I would pay $10 a month just to see what would happen. But on a real note, this is a serious issue, right? Twitter has permanently suspended his ability to speak along with the other social media big boys. This is coming after two specific tweets, neither of which, in my mind, call for violence. But Twitter issued an official statement which explained their justification. In short, they broke down the tweets and tried to read between the lines and make some inferences, and they made some, I would call, very loose connections to the Capitol riot and also potential future violence. And we can kind of get into the statement in a little bit later. I don't know if you have the tweets there ready to go. It's okay if you don't. But so let's just start here, I guess. Was Twitter justified? Was big tech in general, not just Twitter, are they justified in taking down the president's ability to tweet or to communicate on their platforms? What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll let Chris go first, and then I'll answer.
Yeah, first, can I say I love the graphic that you provided for this, because it just shows like how ridiculous American politics are. The bad two-paid reality show host is angry. Website won't let him post anymore. And that's what politics is in 2021. It's not about, helping anyone. It's not about policy. It's about someone's mad because he can't shit post anymore. So personally, yeah, I think that Twitter is justified in banning Donald Trump's account. I think it's too little too late, honestly. The particular tweets he was banned for don't directly call for violence. And I think if the government were to prosecute a case against Donald Trump, it would be probably a fairly weak case as far as incitement to violence, because the burden of proof when it comes to prosecuting someone is very strong. But I think when it comes to private individuals and private corporations, we don't have to pretend that we're stupid. This violence would not have happened had it not been for Donald Trump and the misinformation that he spread on Twitter. That is just a fact. There's no way that this protest would have happened, let alone would it have become a riot of people who went in purportedly with the intent to arrest and possibly kill members of Congress, including the president of the Senate, Mike Pence. So I think it was too little too late. They were absolutely within their rights to ban him. And it was the responsible decision to not allow him to spread this kind of dangerous misinformation anymore that could have gotten which did get people killed.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I see is there were two big attractive things about Donald Trump for Republicans and conservatives. The first was the fact that he was willing to say whatever came to his mind. He was self-funded, and so he could be politically incorrect. There was a thirst for this that goes back to Newt Gingrich and Sarah Palin, and the notion that someone doesn't have to color in the lines and obey the rules of the media and can simply say what they want to say. The Megyn Kelly back and forth, all of that stuff was huge. And then the second thing that Donald Trump did that was hugely attractive to conservatives is that with Twitter, he was constantly communicating all of the time from the White House what he was thinking, for better or for worse, right? Whether you agree with it or not. And I know a lot of times people would, they would even conservatives, Republicans would disagree with it. But it was fascinating, if you go back 4 years from now, to see someone who, instead of posting tweets and things like that were just very stale and political and, hey, way to go. We just had a ceremony just like we do every year for Thanksgiving and pardon to turkey, to what Trump was doing, which was calling people out and working through his thought process. Right now, we're years into that, and I know most people have just been worn down by it. But it was fascinating to see someone just completely be real and honest and all of those things. Even if you hate him, it was fascinating to see that on Twitter, and it was a level of access that I would say that no one had ever had to the White House before. Literally blowing up your phone, every time that you open it to Twitter with his account. That was the benefit,
Yeah.
And I guess, and I understand what you're saying, Chris, in terms of the responsibility that he had and how it got out of hand. His speech, the things that he said before, implied that people should take action. I know it didn't quite go as far, as some liberals have said. But at the same time, I get where they're coming from, in that they say he didn't do enough to warn about the violence. But my concern is this, is if we get to a point where these businesses kind of lose the veil of political objectivity, right? Then we get, which, I would agree is within their right, their businesses, it's not government entities, but we get to a point where things get even more fragmented. If you're conservative, well, then you go to this platform. If you're a liberal, you go to that one. and it just kind of is this further perpetuation down to where everyone is getting completely different networks. And that, I guess that is the concern. When Facebook first started, when Twitter first started, it was this place where everyone could go. And I think where we're headed is a place where, nope, you don't go there because that's where the liberals are, right? And I hate to see that. I hate to see that if we get to a place where there really is no open media. So thoughts on that, Kyle?
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of responses there. You said, one of the greatest things about Twitter is the transparency that it afforded us with Donald Trump, and I think that's true. And honestly, well, I think it's both positive and negative. There's always there's always the tweet, and with Donald Trump, there really was always a tweet. No matter what he said, there was always a tweet of him saying something literally the opposite, from a previous tweet. So there was always a tweet. So it often worked against him. But I'll say this, in a time where, the media, in my mind, is extraordinarily dishonest, it was a way for him to give him access to the people in an unfiltered way.
Exactly.
Just even looking for the tweets today, I couldn't even find the tweets today without Chris sending me the link to the Twitter, the official Twitter statement. I couldn't find them, but what I could find was 200 stories saying Donald Trump had some bad tweets and he incited violence and stuff like this. So, instead of actually hearing his words, we could see the narrative about it. And I think that was really one of the benefits to Twitter, is that we got his actual words and not just the narrative or the presentation that one side of us wanted, or one side of the media really wanted us to hear. Yeah. So that's one really big issue, I guess. The second is this, Chris, you talked about inciting violence. Twitter is still allowing several people to remain on the platform after calling for explicit violence. Of course, I'm sure
Ayatollah,
if you've been on social media, the Ayatollah, absolutely.
Right.
But even people like, so Colin Kaepernick, for example, there were protests going on. He said protests were a good thing. That people, I forgot the exact tweet. We can pull it up here, but you can actually pull it up. You can see the tweet that he says, basically violence is a good thing, unrest is a good thing, et cetera, et cetera. And not only did CEO Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, not take that post down, did not censor it, he actually gave Colin Kaepernick $3 million. And so it's what my fear is, it is the politicization of the space. You're right in saying that the First Amendment really only protects from the government. But our right to free speech doesn't come from the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects the right to free speech. The right to free speech is an inherent right. It's a natural right. You can go back to look at John Locke, John Mills, John Milton, whoever you want. And I mean, I would go back to the Bible myself, but the right to free speech and free expression is paramount to what it is to live in a democracy, to live in a free society. And if you have people like Twitter, who, of course, they have the right to take down free speech, but is it really truly emblematic of the democratic process? I don't think so. So,
go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I've been banned from many websites and message boards as a teenager, or having opinions that maybe ran contra to the prevailing attitude on that particular message board. But I never really saw it as a violation of my freedom of speech, because you do have the right to freedom of speech, but there is no natural right to freedom of speech on someone else's property. And Twitter is someone else's property. Your Twitter is not yours. Your Facebook account doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Twitter. It belongs to Facebook. And I think the quicker people realize that, maybe that's a step toward breaking up some of the power that these big social media empires have, because I would absolutely agree that they do have too much power. I don't think their power to, Twitter's power to decide what is posted on Twitter, I don't think is a great example of that. I would agree that there are many other foreign leaders, especially, who should have their Twitter accounts deactivated. I think that's a valid argument. If we're going to take down Donald Trump's, we should also take down Ayatollah Khomeini's and tons of other authoritarian fascist leaders who use their platforms to spread lies and misinformation. We saw, I think, one of the Chinese Communist Party's accounts last week tweeted something really despicable, some propaganda about their Muslim concentration camps, where they said, they were enlightening these people and giving them more positive attitudes about birth control, when in reality they were sterilizing them. And those accounts should absolutely be banned. But, my position has always been that Twitter needs to do more and not less to curtail the spread of dangerous and deadly misinformation. And if you want to say that is suppressing conservative thought, I can't imagine a more damning statement about conservatism as it is today, because Twitter isn't banning people for saying we want low taxation and small government. They're banning people for saying Mike Pence is going to get the death penalty, and similar
Well, yeah,
opinions.
good.
That's conservatism. That's if we're going to move the Overton window that far, we may as well say, okay, we can't ban people for saying that the Holocaust is fake, or that we should have another one, because that is technically a political opinion. I am not comfortable with the Overton window shifting that far, and so we do need to have limits.
Sure. Go ahead, Wes.
No, you call and then I'll finish. Go ahead.
Sure. So Not the Bee. If you guys are familiar with the Babylon Bee, of course, they're the very funny satire site.
Yeah.
They have a sister site, which is Not the Bee, which takes pretty ludicrous stories that are actually real. One of those stories today was that the hashtag Hang Mike Pence was trending on Twitter today. Hang Mike Pence. So the Not the Bee, which is again the real story, real news site, actually shared that story and got censored for sharing the hashtag Hang Mike Pence. Yeah. And so we don't just see it there. Again, I'm pretty active in the gun community. Almost every person I follow on YouTube or any of the social media sites gets banned regularly. Same thing with anti-abortion, or I'd call it pro-life content. Same thing with religious content. I've been banned, or I've been banned. I've been silent. I've had tweets removed. I've had Facebook posts removed, and for things that are well within the Overton window. Just the trend that we see here is not one for free speech or free expression or for the free exchange of ideas. It's you better get on board with the agenda, or you're not going to have a voice.
Sure, absolutely. When I think about what is missing from this is the opportunity to give someone else a chance to speak. I mean, look what we're doing right now, right? Like trying not to step over each other as we each give thoughts that are to some degree contradicting or different than each other, right? One of the, this frustrates me, this decision. I'm glad that we all kind of are suspicious of it to a degree. It also made me frustrated in the first debate when Trump wouldn't let Joe Biden talk, right?
Yeah.
I didn't vote for Joe Biden, and I didn't plan to. And I don't, generally, I'm not going to support Democrats or what they stand for or those positions, but let the man talk. And it frustrated me that Trump was constantly interrupting him because of this notion of free speech. Even if it extends, Trump, according to the rules of the debate, was just kind of acting classlessly, but he wasn't actually breaking necessarily the rules. The moderator just couldn't keep track of it. But regardless of the legality of it, is let the other side speak, respect others so that you can be respected, love others so that, you can be loved. Yeah. It's this notion of treating other people the way that you want to be treated that is so lost because, we don't think of them as people. Because someone is a Democrat or a liberal like Chris, then I, as a conservative, don't have to treat him with any of the dignity that I afford other people. Yep. That is the problem here, right? Is that we're constantly thinking the worst out of people. And you guys are totally right, as we work through this issue. So I really hope it's something that passes. I hope we get to a point where, these networks are needed. These businesses are needed because people need a common place to go. And if we all end up in our own echo chambers, right, which frankly, these networks have already been doing by only showing you what you want to see.
Yeah, of course.
Only people who agree with you, they've already been doing a disservice. And now to start banning people, it's just the next step. And what we need and what I would love to see is places that actually start to encourage you to interact with the other side in a responsible fashion, right? And being able to do that. I'll give you one last example, and then we'll let this topic go. Is we have a thing in my local community called Nextdoor, and it's basically you have to be from the community to get on it, right? And it is moderated, but at the same time, it tends to be much more civil because everybody on there is from the same zip code, and you introduce yourself when you come in. And sure, they have issues just like anywhere else. But people tend to be way more civil when they realize it's their neighbor down the street, not someone who's far away or the other or some random person with a hashtag or, a Facebook name, right? With that, so there's a legitimacy process to it. And maybe that's where we need to go. I'm not sure. But if these companies continue to go the way they're doing, they're creating a market for something else. And frankly, that's what we have here. That's what we're doing now is, allowing each other to disagree to be able to see, you know, things in our own perspective and to be able to trade those thoughts. So that's the loss. I hope we can work our way out of it. Obviously not something that we can control, but something certainly that we can analyze and talk about and try to be different with. So Chris, I'm going to give you the last word on here, and then we'll be out for today. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen some pretty rough stuff on Nextdoor. Small town drama can get pretty awful. So I ended up deleting that app. But I think content moderation, we need to understand, is very hard. And it's very difficult to enforce rules fairly. And a lot of it is done by artificial intelligence now.
That's
So, you know, there's leftists that get banned from Twitter too. I've seen female tweeters get banned for the statement, "I hate men," which, you know, doesn't really have any effect on my life as a man. But I've seen them get banned for that. It can be unfair, but, you know, if for some reason Refounding Fathers was banned from Facebook, we would be able to start our own website. And no one could stop anyone from typing in www.refoundingfathers.com or something similar. You know, I'm not super tech literate, but I'm sure between the three of us, we could do it. And we'll be able to exercise our freedom of speech. We might not have the ability to reach the same kind of audience, but that in itself, I don't think is a right. I don't think that we're entitled to use anyone else's megaphone. I think as long as we are using platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they do have certain power over our lives. But maybe this kind of moderation and this kind of aggressive moderation will end up causing a kind of, you know, free market anti-monopolization effect, where we see
good point.
Go
Yeah.
That's what I've been saying to people. Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Parler is obviously a failure, but you know, maybe we'll see an internet that looks a little bit more like the pre-social media age, where people had all of these different niche platforms to go to, and really the internet back then was kind of a better place than it is now. So that might be a positive effect.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle said it before too on this show numerous times, is that internet is only valuable for so much. So, you know, what we're doing in terms of talking to each other, like, this is great, but it doesn't take the place of everyday life, and I'm the first to admit that. Great discussion, guys. I really appreciate it. We are going to reset here. We're going to have conservatism on tap starting here in about 5 minutes. So for those watching, feel free to hang around. We'll go live here in another 5 minutes. But thank you guys so much. Always a great discussion. We'll see, you know, what the next week brings. It's definitely been a very, you know, interesting, exciting, scary at times week, but I'm thankful to have you guys here to be able to sort through it with me. So appreciate all you do, and we will see you next Sunday. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Get that OnlyFans done.